Nobody is thinking about you. Not the way you think they are, not the way you fear they are. Right now, somewhere out there, a person you spent 3 sleepless nights worrying about has already moved on, consumed by their own deadlines, their own insecurities, their own quiet wars. They aren't replaying your conversation. They aren't analyzing your mistakes. They're just living, and so is everyone else. This is the truth nobody tells you, not because it's cruel, but because it cuts too close to something we all quietly do. We place ourselves at the center of other people's worlds and then suffer when we realize we were never really there. You've been performing for an audience that left. Monitoring your words, rehearsing your explanations, editing yourself before you even speak. Building a version of yourself designed to be approved, to be chosen, to be enough in someone else's eyes. And it's exhausting, not because people are unkind, but because their eyes were never really watching to begin with. This is not a video about becoming cold. It's not a call to isolate. It's something rarer, a reminder, sharp, stoic, and necessary, that the most liberating thing you can do with your one life is stop asking the world to validate it. Nobody cares about you the way you think. And the moment you truly accept that, everything changes. If you're ready to stop performing and start living for yourself, drop "I choose me" in the comments. Let that be your declaration, not for us, but for you. The invisible audience you're performing for. There's a psychological phenomenon researchers call the spotlight effect. It was studied carefully by Thomas Gilovich and Kenneth Savitsky at Cornell University, and what they found was both fascinating and quietly devastating. When people make a mistake, spill something, say the wrong thing, wear the wrong outfit, they consistently, dramatically overestimate how much other people noticed. They walk away convinced that everyone saw, everyone judged, everyone remembered. But here's what the data showed. Almost nobody noticed, and the few who did, they forgot almost immediately because they were too busy managing their own internal spotlight, their own embarrassments, their own anxieties, their own desperate need to be seen and not judged. You are not the exception to this, neither am I. Think about the last time you said something in a group and immediately replayed it in your head for hours afterward. You analyzed your tone, second-guessed your word choice, wondered what they thought, building an entire courtroom in your mind with yourself as both defendant and judge. Meanwhile, the people in that room had already moved on. They were thinking about what to eat for dinner. They were mentally drafting a text message. They were managing their own invisible courtrooms. This is the invisible audience, the one you perform for every single day, the one that, for the most part, does not exist. And the tragedy isn't just that it doesn't exist. The tragedy is how much of your life you spend performing for it anyway, how you edit your opinions before sharing them, how you dress not for yourself, but for some imagined observer, how you make decisions, real, life-altering decisions, based on how they might look to people who will barely think about you twice. Marcus Aurelius understood this centuries before modern psychology could name it. He wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." Read that again. Sit with it. You love yourself more than you love anyone else, and yet you hand the power to define your worth to people whose opinions you would never extend the same trust to if they asked for it directly. Why do we do this? Part of it is social. Human beings evolved in small tribal communities where being rejected from the group was a literal death sentence. Your nervous system doesn't fully know the difference between social rejection and physical danger. When someone criticizes you, ignores you, or excludes you, the same ancient alarm system fires. You feel it in your chest. That's not weakness, that's wiring. But here's what the Stoics would remind you. Just because something is wired doesn't mean it's wise. Just because your brain sounds the alarm doesn't mean the threat is real. The tribe no longer abandons you to the wilderness for saying something awkward at a gathering. The cost of disapproval is almost never as high as your nervous system insists it is. And yet, the performance continues. You perform in relationships. You say, "I'm fine," when you're not, because being honest feels too risky. You agree with opinions you don't hold, because disagreement feels like rejection. You shrink yourself in rooms where you feel out of place, then wonder why you never feel fully known. You are playing a role for a theater full of people who are all too busy playing their own roles to watch yours. There's something almost darkly humorous about this when you see it clearly. Billions of people, all carefully curating their behavior for audiences who are too self-occupied to really watch. All performing for a stage that nobody is sitting in front of. All while starving for genuine connection that can only happen when the performance stops. The invisible audience isn't just a minor inconvenience. It is the primary thief of your authenticity, your confidence, and your peace. It keeps you in relationships that have expired, in jobs that suffocate you, in versions of yourself that fit everyone else's comfort but your own. You stay small, so others won't feel threatened. You stay quiet, so others won't be uncomfortable. You stay stuck, so the invisible audience in your head will finally approve. It won't. That's the cruelest part. The invisible audience you're performing for is not even a real audience. It's you. It's your own fears wearing other people's faces. It's the voice that tells you that you're not enough, dressed up in the imagined judgment of people who are mostly just trying to get through their own day. Seneca wrote, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." When your attention is constantly split between your actual life and the imagined audience watching it, you are never fully present in either. You ghost your own existence, chasing approval from ghosts. The first step forward isn't to stop caring. That would be dishonest. The first step is simply to see the audience for what it is. Invisible, imagined, and deeply unqualified to be the judge of your worth. Because the only real audience you have ever had, the only one paying close, constant, unbroken attention to your life, is you. Start performing for that one. Why your brain is wired to seek approval. You didn't wake up one day and decide to need approval. It was installed in you, quietly, consistently over years, by a world that conditioned you to believe that your worth was something other people measured and handed back to you. Think about how early it starts. As a child, you didn't just want food and shelter. You needed to feel that you mattered to the people around you. That need is not a flaw. It is a fundamental aspect of human development. Psychologists call it attachment. Children who feel securely attached to caregivers who are consistent, warm, and responsive develop a stable internal sense of worth. Children who grow up in environments where love feels conditional, where approval is something you earn by performing correctly, develop a much more fragile relationship with their own value. If love came with conditions attached, your developing mind drew a logical conclusion. I am only worthy when I am approved of. And that conclusion, formed before you had the cognitive tools to question it, has been quietly running in the background of your adult life ever since. This is not a blame exercise. Parents do what they know. Systems do what they're built to do. Schools reward conformity with gold stars and punish deviation with shame. Social media amplifies the approval loop to a deafening frequency, Every like, every comment, every view becoming a microdose of validation that your nervous system processes as momentary worth. You are quite literally being algorithmically trained to need attention. Leon Festinger's social comparison theory adds another layer to this. Humans are meaning-making creatures, and one of the primary ways we make meaning is by measuring ourselves against other people. Are we doing better or worse? Are we more or less successful, attractive, capable, respected? This comparison isn't always conscious. Most of the time it happens automatically, beneath the surface of your awareness, quietly shaping your sense of where you stand. Left unchecked, this becomes a treadmill with no destination. There is always someone doing more, having more, appearing to feel less. And every time you measure yourself against that person and find yourself lacking, the approval machine kicks on, seeking external reassurance to fill an internal gap. Epictetus cut through all of this with characteristic sharpness. Man is disturbed not by things, but by the opinions about things. The validation you're seeking isn't really about other people's opinion of you. It's about your opinion of yourself, temporarily borrowed from others because you haven't yet learned to generate it internally. Their approval becomes a substitute for self-approval, and like all substitutes, it never quite satisfies. Here's the uncomfortable truth about dopamine and validation. The brain's reward system doesn't distinguish between genuine love and empty praise. Both trigger a release of dopamine. Both feel like nourishment in the moment, but one builds something, actual connection, actual self-knowledge, actual growth, and the other just feeds the hunger without ever filling it. You can spend an entire lifetime collecting compliments and approval, and arrive at the end of it feeling more hollow than you started, because none of it was ever truly yours. It was borrowed, and borrowed self-worth has to be constantly renewed. Social media has turned this biological vulnerability into a full-scale crisis. Every platform is architecturally designed to exploit your approval-seeking wiring. The metrics are public, the comparison is constant, the feedback is immediate, and the dopamine loop is ruthlessly efficient. You post something vulnerable and wait. The waiting is its own kind of suffering, a quiet, restless monitoring of whether the world is going to validate this piece of yourself you offered up. When the response comes, it satisfies for about as long as it takes to check again. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire and had the approval of millions, still had to remind himself daily, in private journals never intended for public eyes, to not be seduced by the crowd's praise. "Receive without pride, release without struggle," he wrote. Even at the heights of external validation, he understood that the moment you need the applause to feel whole, you have surrendered your inner citadel to something that can be taken from you without warning. So where does this leave you? Understanding why is not the same as being free from it. Knowing your brain is wired for approval doesn't automatically dissolve the craving, but it does something important. It takes the shame away. You are not weak for needing to feel valued. You are not broken for wanting to be seen. You are human, shaped by biology and experience into someone who looks outward for what can only ultimately be found inward. The rewiring is possible. It is not fast, and it is not painless, but it begins with a single, quiet act of courage. Deciding that your sense of worth is no longer up for public vote. That the only referendum that matters on your value as a human being is the one you hold privately, consistently, in the undistracted chamber of your own self-knowledge. You were handed a wiring that craves approval. The work, the real Stoic work, is to build something stronger than the craving. The true cost of living for others. There is a version of your life you are not living. It exists in the space between what you actually want and what you've allowed yourself to pursue, compressed down, made smaller, made quieter, made safe enough not to invite judgment. You've been so careful, so diplomatic, so aware of how things look, how they land, what they might cost you in someone else's approval. And somewhere in all that careful management, you drifted from yourself. This is the true cost of living for others, not just the obvious exhaustion of people-pleasing, though that's real and it accumulates. The deeper cost is identity erosion, the slow, almost imperceptible wearing away of who you actually are when you spend years prioritizing who others need you to be. Think about how it shows up. You have opinions you've never voiced because the room felt too comfortable with its own consensus. You have ambitions you've quietly buried because someone important in your life responded to them with doubt or indifference. You've stayed in friendships past their expiration date because ending them felt unkind, not recognizing that staying in something hollow is unkind to yourself. You've apologized for things that weren't your fault. You've made yourself smaller in rooms where you were actually the most capable person present. Every single one of those moments had a price, not always visible at the time, but compounding quietly, the way debt does. The psychological term for this is self-silencing, and research consistently connects it to depression, anxiety, and a loss of authentic identity. When you suppress your genuine reactions, preferences, and boundaries to manage other people's comfort, you are not just being polite, you are actively participating in your own diminishment. You are training yourself, through repetition and reinforcement, that your truth is less important than their ease, that your needs are an inconvenience, that who you really are is something that requires managing and hiding. And here is the insidious part. This pattern doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers. It frames itself as kindness, as maturity, as not making things difficult. It convinces you that shrinking is grace, that silence is generosity, that keeping the peace by sacrificing your authenticity is somehow noble. It is not noble. It is a slow disappearance. Seneca wrote in one of his letters, "Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est." All things are alien to us. Time alone is ours. He was making a point about distraction, but it applies here with equal force. When you spend your finite time and energy curating a version of yourself designed for other people's approval, you are not just wasting time, you are spending the only resource that can never be recovered on something that will never pay you back in full. Think about the decisions you've made, real decisions, not hypothetical ones, where someone else's opinion was the deciding vote. The career path you didn't take because a parent had different expectations. The relationship you stayed in long past the point of honesty because leaving felt too exposed. The creative work you've never shared because imagining criticism felt worse than the silence of keeping it to yourself. These are not small things. These are your life. And the people whose approval you were protecting? Most of them have moved on. Most of them are not thinking about those moments. Most of them are living their own lives, making their own decisions, worrying about their own invisible audiences. The sacrifice you made on the altar of their approval wasn't even witnessed properly. The audience didn't stay to see the whole performance. You gave something real and irretrievable for a standing ovation that never came. This is not said to create bitterness. Bitterness is just another form of giving other people power over your emotional state. This is said to create clarity. The Stoics were not cold people. Marcus Aurelius loved deeply his family, his friends, his citizens. Seneca had rich and genuine friendships. Epictetus, despite his history of enslavement, showed profound warmth toward his students. What made them Stoic was not the absence of care. It was the refusal to allow other people's judgment to become the measure of their worth. They distinguished, sharply and deliberately, between love and approval. You can love someone deeply without needing their approval to feel whole. You can respect someone without making their opinion the final word on your value. Living for others also has a physical cost that rarely gets discussed. Chronic people-pleasing activates the stress response. The constant monitoring, are they happy with me? Did I say the right thing? Will they approve? Keeps your nervous system in a low-grade state of alert. Over time, this contributes to anxiety, fatigue, difficulty making decisions, and a pervasive sense of never being quite enough no matter what you do. You are paying for their comfort with your health. So ask yourself honestly, what version of your life have you been postponing? What have you wanted to say, do, create, or become that you've kept compressed in the name of keeping everyone else comfortable? What decisions are waiting for you on the other side of what will they think? The cost of living for others is paid in the currency of your actual life. And unlike money, that currency cannot be earned back. The question isn't whether you can afford to keep paying. The question is whether you've been paying long enough to finally decide it's time to stop. Attention is not love. Silence reveals everything. At some point, most people confuse the two. Attention and love. They look similar from a distance. They both feel warm when they arrive. They both sting when they're absent. But they are fundamentally different things, and mistaking one for the other is one of the most quietly destructive errors a person can make. Attention is plentiful and cheap. Anyone can give it. Someone can watch your every move, follow your social media obsessively, text you constantly, and be entirely absorbed in your life, not out of love, but out of habit, anxiety, loneliness, or the need to feel needed. Attention can be given by people who don't respect you, don't value you, and will withdraw it the moment it stops serving their own emotional needs. Attention is a behavior. Love is a commitment. Love, the real kind, shows up differently. It shows up in consistency, not intensity. It shows up in the quiet moments, the phone call when nothing is wrong, the presence that doesn't need to perform, the honesty that risks discomfort because it cares about your actual well-being more than your temporary comfort. Real love doesn't need an audience. It doesn't evaporate when there's nothing exciting to respond to. It's there on the ordinary Tuesday when nothing is happening and there's nothing to gain. Now think about the people in your life who have given you a lot of attention. Then think separately about the people who have been consistently, quietly, reliably there. They are not always the same people. In fact, sometimes they are not even close to the same people. This is what silence reveals. When you stop performing, when you stop being entertaining, available, agreeable, or useful, the people whose presence was always conditional begin to fade. They don't make a dramatic exit. They just become less and less present. The texts become shorter, then rarer, then absent. The interest, which felt so real and so warm when you were giving them what they wanted, quietly dissolves when you stop being the version of yourself they found convenient. This hurts. It's supposed to hurt. The hurt is information. What it's telling you is not that you were wrong to give. Generosity and care are not weaknesses. What it's telling you is that the connection was never as mutual as it appeared. You were loving a relationship. They were enjoying an arrangement, and arrangements, unlike relationships, only last as long as the terms remain favorable. The Stoics had a clear view of this. Epictetus taught his students to distinguish between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Other people's feelings, other people's choices, other people's continued presence. None of that is within your control. What is within your control is the quality of who you are and how you show up. When you chase someone's continued attention, trying to perform well enough to keep them engaged, you are spending energy on something that was never in your hands. Let them go, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in the clear-eyed recognition that someone who only shows up when it's convenient for them was never truly showing up for you. Silence also reveals you to yourself. When you stop filling every quiet moment with the noise of seeking, scrolling, performing, monitoring whether people are responding to you correctly, you begin to hear something underneath. Your own voice, your own needs, your own clarity about what you actually value, what you actually want, and what you've been tolerating in the name of not being alone with those questions. Most people are terrified of that silence. They fill it with their phones, with busy schedules, with relationships that don't nourish them, but at least provide the hum of activity. Because in the silence they might have to reckon with how much of their external seeking has been a way to avoid internal knowing. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who don't really know you, because you've been too careful, too managed, too performed to let yourself be known. That loneliness is among the most acute a person can feel, and no amount of attention from those same people will fix it, because it's not their attention you need, it's your own honesty. When someone goes quiet, when someone fades, when someone who you thought cared reveals through their absence that they were always more invested in what you gave them than in who you actually are. That silence is not a verdict on your worth. It is a clarification of reality. They were not who you needed them to be, and now you know. Here is the gift inside the hard lesson. When you stop confusing attention with love, you stop accepting less than love. You raise the bar, not out of arrogance or guardedness, but out of genuine self-respect. You stop being grateful for crumbs because you've forgotten what a full meal feels like. You start recognizing the difference between someone who makes you feel seen and someone who merely makes you feel busy. Between someone who adds to your life and someone who just occupies space in it. And you start to understand, maybe for the first time clearly, that you would rather be known by one person who truly sees you than celebrated by 100 who only see what you perform. Quality over noise, depth over attention, truth over the warm hum of being temporarily chosen. That is where real love of others and of yourself actually lives. Nobody is coming to save you. This might be the hardest thing in this entire video to hear, so let it land slowly. Nobody is coming. Not to rescue you from the circumstances that are holding you back. Not to hand you the motivation you've been waiting for. Not to see your potential so clearly that their belief in you finally ignites your belief in yourself. Not to give you the closure that would let you finally move on. Not to choose you so completely that you finally feel chosen enough to choose yourself. Nobody is coming. And that is not a tragedy. It is the most clarifying truth you might ever accept. There is a kind of waiting that most people don't even recognize as waiting, because it has become so woven into the texture of daily life. You wait for someone to notice how hard you're working. You wait for the relationship to change without having the conversation that might change it. You wait for conditions to become better before you begin the thing you've been meaning to begin. You wait for permission from a parent, a partner, a society, a version of yourself that feels ready enough before claiming the life you want. The waiting is seductive because it feels safer than action. If you're waiting, you can't fail yet. If you haven't tried, you haven't been rejected. The waiting has its own strange comfort, like standing at the edge of cold water and telling yourself you'll get in when the conditions are right. But the conditions are never going to be right. And while you're waiting, the water doesn't warm. Time just passes. The Stoics had a word for this: procrastination of the self. Not laziness, but the deeper paralysis that comes from believing that something external needs to shift before you can begin to live fully. Marcus Aurelius addressed it directly. Confine yourself to the present. Not the present as it might become, the present as it is. Because the life you're waiting to start living has already been in progress for quite some time now. Think about the closure you've been seeking. From a relationship that ended badly, from a person who hurt you without explanation, from a version of yourself that you're still grieving. You've been waiting for them to come back with an apology, an explanation, an acknowledgement that would allow you to finally exhale. But what if they never do? What if the explanation is never satisfying? What if the apology comes too late to change anything that matters? Closure is not something another person gives you. It is something you grant yourself, a private act of deciding that the story has taught you what it had to teach, that carrying the unresolved weight any further is simply too expensive, and that moving forward does not require their participation. You close the door yourself. You don't wait for them to knock. The same is true for motivation. There is a pervasive myth that motivation is something you feel before you act, that you're supposed to wait for the feeling of readiness before beginning the work. But the Stoics, and every honest practitioner of discipline before and since, understood the opposite. Action creates motivation. Movement creates momentum. You don't wait until you feel ready to build your life. You build your life, and the feeling of readiness arrives as a byproduct. Epictetus, who began his life as an enslaved person with no control over his physical circumstances, understood this with a clarity that most people with far greater freedom never access. He could not change his chains. He could not wait for someone to come and grant him the inner freedom he cultivated. He built it himself, in the only domain that was ever truly his own mind. Make the best use of what is in your power, he wrote, and take the rest as it happens. What is in your power? Right now, today, with the exact circumstances you have? More than you think, far more than the waiting suggests. Your health is largely in your power. Your habits are in your power. Your honesty with yourself and the people who matter to you is in your power. Your attention is in your power. What you read, what you build, what you pursue, how you treat people, whether you do the hard thing or the easy thing when no one is watching, all of that is in your power. Nobody is coming to make you do any of it. Nobody is coming to validate it while you do. Nobody is watching closely enough to notice if you quietly stop. And that is precisely the freedom on offer here, the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of being entirely responsible for your own becoming. When you stop waiting, something shifts. The energy you were spending on anticipation, on hoping, on performing so someone might finally notice, on crafting explanations for why you haven't started yet, that energy becomes available for something else, for the actual work, for the actual life. Nobody is coming, so go. Build the thing, have the conversation, end what needs ending, begin what needs beginning, not because someone finally saw you well enough to believe in you, but because you finally saw yourself clearly enough to stop needing them to. That is where self-respect actually begins, not in affirmations, not in someone choosing you. In the quiet, private decision to stop waiting for permission and start showing up, fully, consistently, without an audience, for your own life. Stop performing, start building. There is a version of you that exists only when other people are watching. This version is curated, calibrated, careful. It knows how to present well, how to frame things favorably, how to manage impressions so the observer comes away with the right conclusion. It's not entirely fake, it's drawn from real material, but it's edited so heavily that it bears only a surface resemblance to the person who exists when the performance ends and the lights go down. Most people live at a significant distance from that person, the private self, the one with actual desires, actual fears, actual capacity, unmanaged, unperformed, unpolished. The gap between those two people is where your energy goes. Every unit of attention you spend on managing perceptions is a unit of attention not spent on building anything real. And the math, over time, becomes brutal. You can spend a lifetime maintaining the performance and arrive at the end of it with an impressive image and an empty interior, respected by people who don't know you, admired for qualities that cost you everything to project, and quietly hollowed out by the work of being something for everyone else while remaining nothing fully for yourself. The Stoics had a concept for the authentic self, the inner citadel, as Marcus Aurelius described it. A place within you that external circumstances cannot penetrate unless you open the gate. Your opinions, your values, your commitments, your character, these are the contents of that citadel. Nobody can take them from you, but you can abandon them. And performance is a form of abandonment, the slow daily act of choosing the approval of the crowd over the integrity of the interior. What would it look like to stop performing and start building? It starts with a radical reorientation of audience. Instead of asking, "How does this look?" you begin asking, "Is this aligned?" Aligned with what you actually value, aligned with who you are trying to become, aligned with the life you would choose if you were genuinely free from the weight of judgment. This does not mean ignoring feedback, becoming arrogant, or dismissing the perspective of people whose wisdom you respect. The Stoics were not hermits. They engaged deeply with the world. What they refused to do was let the world's approval become the measure of their worth. There is a critical difference between someone whose thoughtful feedback you genuinely incorporate because it makes you better, and the shapeless, anonymous mass of imagined judgment that you perform for every day. One is useful, the other is a prison. Building requires privacy, not secrecy, privacy. There is a difference. Secrecy hides things because they couldn't survive exposure. Privacy protects things because they need space to become real before they're ready to be shared. The seedling before the tree. The idea before the work. The commitment before the result. When you announce everything you intend to do before you've done any of it, you leak the energy that building requires. Social approval becomes a substitute for the harder satisfaction of actual completion. You get the dopamine hit of people being impressed by your plan, and then find yourself with less motivation to execute it because something in the reward system has already been satisfied. Keep more to yourself. Build in private. Let results speak where explanations used to. This is not withholding. This is discipline. Seneca understood this. Be silent for the most part, he advised, or say only what is necessary and in few words. In an age of relentless self-broadcasting, that might be the most counter-cultural advice available. You do not need to narrate your becoming for it to count. You do not need an audience for the growth to be real. In fact, the most profound growth almost always happens in rooms where nobody is watching. In the early morning before the day has its demands, in the private discipline of keeping your word to yourself when breaking it would cost you nothing socially. Here's something you may have noticed without fully acknowledging. The people you most deeply respect are rarely the ones who perform the most. They are the ones who have clearly built something in themselves, in their character, in their work, that doesn't need constant amplification. Their confidence doesn't require your validation to sustain itself. It comes from somewhere internal and stable. It comes from the accumulated knowledge of someone who has done the work, kept their commitments, and developed, over time and in private, the kind of self-respect that doesn't fluctuate with the crowd's mood. That is available to you, not as a personality trait you either have or don't, as something you build deliberately through the decisions you make when nobody is applauding. Stop performing for the job offer. Start developing the skills that make you genuinely formidable. Stop performing for the relationship. Start developing the emotional honesty that makes you genuinely intimate. Stop performing for the social media audience. Start developing the discipline that makes your actual life the thing you're most proud of. The shift from performance to building is not a single dramatic moment. It's a practice, a daily undramatic choice to put your energy into substance over image, to invest in the interior rather than the exterior, to care more about the person you are when no one is watching than the person you appear to be when everyone is. Marcus Aurelius wrote most of the meditations for himself, not for publication, not for posterity, for the private work of becoming a better man. He was arguably the most powerful person on earth at the time, and he spent his private hours not consolidating his image, but quietly, rigorously interrogating his own character. That is the practice, not grand, not visible, but compounding, the way quiet work always does, into something that no performance could ever replicate, a self that is genuinely, durably yours. Build that, in private if necessary, with consistency, always, and let the results appear in your life without any need for announcement. The Stoic return, choosing yourself. Every journey in, eventually, has to arrive somewhere. You've moved through the discomfort of seeing the invisible audience clearly. You've sat with the cost of what living for others has taken from you. You've felt the sharp, clarifying truth that nobody is coming, that attention is not love, that the performance was always for a theater that was mostly empty. You've begun to understand in your bones, rather than just your mind, that the only project worth fully investing in is the one that bears your name and exists in the only place no one else can reach, your interior life. So what does it actually look like to choose yourself? Not as a concept, as a practice. Daily, imperfect, real. It looks like this. It looks like making decisions with your own values as the primary compass rather than the imagined reactions of others. Not ignoring those you love and respect. Their perspective genuinely matters, but not placing the imagined judgment of the crowd above your own clear-eyed self-knowledge. You stop outsourcing the referendum on your worth and take it in-house, where it belongs. It looks like developing what the Stoics called virtue, not as a performance of goodness for external audiences, but as the private, ongoing practice of acting in alignment with who you intend to be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Not for praise, not for witnesses, just because it is the only way to build an interior that can actually hold your weight when the external world inevitably shifts." It looks like honest boundaries, not walls built from fear or isolation, but clear lines drawn from self-respect and self-knowledge. You stop being available for everything because you understand that being available for everything means being fully present for nothing. You stop explaining your no until the explanation is longer than the request deserved. You give your time, your attention, and your emotional energy to things and people that genuinely reciprocate. Not perfectly, not without friction, but with genuine care and mutual investment. It looks like tolerating and eventually embracing the discomfort of not being universally liked. This is harder than it sounds. The ancient part of your brain that equates disapproval with danger doesn't quiet down overnight. There will be moments when you make an honest choice, hold a real boundary, or stop performing for someone's comfort, and the resulting discomfort will feel almost physically alarming. Your body will tell you that you've done something wrong. Your mind will begin rehearsing explanations and apologies. This is the moment to pause and ask, am I actually wrong? Or am I just uncomfortable with the unfamiliar sensation of being genuine? Those are not the same thing. The discomfort of authenticity is not the same as the guilt of wrongdoing. Learn to tell them apart. It looks like doing the work, whatever your work is, with the kind of consistency that doesn't require external motivation because it has become its own reward. The Stoics believed deeply in the inherent satisfaction of excellent effort, independent of outcome or recognition. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Realize this, and you will find strength." The strength is not the absence of challenge. It is the accumulated experience of having faced challenge without outsourcing your response to someone else's approval. It looks like forgiveness of others, but especially of yourself, for the years spent performing, for the boundaries you didn't hold, for the version of yourself you abandoned in the name of keeping someone else comfortable. The self-compassion that comes with this kind of reckoning is not softness. It is the rational recognition that you were doing what you knew how to do with what you had at the time, and that you now know more and can do differently. It looks like silence that no longer frightens you. The person who has genuinely chosen themselves does not need to fill every quiet moment with external stimulation or validation. They can sit with themselves, with their own thoughts, their own questions, their own company, and find it sufficient. Not always exhilarating, not always peaceful, but sufficient. They are no longer running from themselves. They have made peace with the most permanent, unavoidable companion they will ever have. This is the Stoic return, not a triumphant arrival at a place of having it all figured out, but a quiet, ongoing homecoming to yourself. A daily decision to live from the inside out rather than the outside in. To measure your days not by how many people approved of them, but by whether you acted with integrity, contributed something genuine, and moved, even incrementally, in the direction of the person you intend to become. Nobody cares about you the way you thought they did. Let that truth release you rather than diminish you. You were never going to find yourself in their attention. You were never going to build a life worth living by performing it for others. The freedom you've been seeking was never in their hands. It was always in yours. In the private decision to stop waiting, stop performing, stop chasing, and start building the only thing that was ever really yours to build. Your life. Not the version edited for approval, not the version calibrated for the comfort of the imagined audience, the actual one. The messy, unfinished, deeply yours version that exists when the performance finally ends and you are just quietly, courageously, sufficiently yourself. That's where your real life has been waiting. Go meet it. You made it to the end of this. That's not nothing. Most people scroll past the hard truths. You sat with this one, so own it. Drop a comment below. I choose my growth. Let that be the first decision you make for yourself today. Subscribe to the Stoic Mode and hit the bell, because this conversation is far from over. The best of what you're capable of is still ahead of you. Thank you for listening. Stay focused. Stay free.
as you begin the